same thing. I mean, I make
Anyway,
things
the
kind
good
of
thing is you got your laptop. You've
yes,
got your laptop back, which is
yes.
excellent. Yeah.
It is actually pretty pretty unusual. I actually already lost it. Both me and my husband didn't think I would get it back, and I already ordered one, which is a new one, which is on the way, should arrive today. So
Okay.
it's a pleasant surprise that I got my laptop back. So
Right.
very
Right.
good.
Well, good for the airline. That's all I would say. Yeah.
Yeah. The latest one is, of course, the big thing is Biden dropped out of the race. First of all, this thing is
Mm.
kind of weird because he didn't come out. This is an important announcement, right? That he didn't come out. He just put a letter on X and then followed with another X post. He support. He endorsed Kamala Harris. Do you think is there something going on there? Your colleague Alexander Alex Christopher was saying there's a coup. Somebody just made the decision for him or something. Do you think that that's what's going on? That he himself insisted, no, I'm not dropping out, but somebody just saying you have to come to your senses or something like that. He kind of maneuvered over this thing. Is that a possibility?
It it is a very real possibility. I mean, it does actually look to me as if he was presented with a fait accompli, that he didn't want to step down. I mean, I think there's no doubt about that. He really didn't want to step down. He was very resistant to doing it right up to the very last moment. And somebody said, enough's enough. We've already made it clear that we want him to step down on Sunday. Just a few hours before, there were reports that he wanted to cling on. So they just preempted his decision by publishing a statement over his, what looks like, by the way, a sort of, copy of his signature rather than the signature itself, on blank sheet of paper, typewritten on X. It doesn't use White House notepaper. It doesn't use Biden campaign notepaper. The whole thing looks extremely strange, very strange language, saying that he's decided to step down for the good of the party and of the country. Doesn't give any real reasons why he is stepping down. He doesn't say that he's stepping down for health reasons or any explanation. We're promised an address will come to the American people in a couple of days. There's no sign of that, by the way, so far. In fact, Biden has been almost invisible over the last couple of hours. So the whole thing has a very, very creepy and eerie and weird look about it. I mean, it's a little bit like, if you were a student of the former Soviet Union, it was a little bit like, the fall of Khrushchev in 1964, that suddenly, the leader whom everybody was supporting had just gone. There was just this announcement that he'd gone. The party enthusiastically applauded his successor, who's Leonid Brezhnev, and there's no real explanation offered to the Soviet people as to why it happened. And it's a little bit like that with this Biden announcement as well. So it's all very strange and very mysterious and very unexplained, and it doesn't really make a huge amount of sense, at least not in the way that it's been done. And just to add to the mystery of it all, um, 27 minutes after the first statement, another statement saying that he was supporting Kamala Harris. And again, the fact that the two statements had to be published one after the other, that also suggests that there was an awful lot of um, toing and froing and discussion and negotiation taking place between the coup plotters, and that this has again been done in this very strange and weird way. And as you absolutely correctly said, given the immensity of this announcement, given the fact that the President of the United States, the man who was on the brink of being renominated for his party to stand in the election in November, was pulling out of that election, at the very least, this required a statement on national television by the president himself, a presidential address to the American people. That is what Lyndon Johnson did when he pulled out of the presidential election in March 1968. But apparently, that's not what the American people are going to get this time.
It's very interesting. I mean, for one thing, there's lots of confusion. So when I landed in the U.S. Last Thursday, shortly after that, I saw that somebody saying, okay, he's going to make an announcement this weekend that he's going to drop out. Okay, and it's all over the place. It's all the mainstream media was talking about that. But then I think later, like Friday evening or something, I saw somebody saying, no, 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 he's going to stay. The Clintons are supporting him, etc. So it sounds like he's probably not going to drop out. And then the whole Saturday was quiet. And then Sunday afternoon came the announcement, and not that official kind of announcement. So there must be some kind of infight going on within the Democratic Party. Is that also what's reflected here?
Well, well, absolutely. That's exactly what's happened. I mean, he didn't want to go. On Friday, there was an attempt to basically push him, to give him a public push, to get him to accept that he wasn't going to be able to stay as president. He clearly wasn't buying that. He clearly was resisting it. So we had the announcements on Friday that he was about to leave and that he was going to make the announcement on Sunday. And then a few hours later, he comes back and says, actually, that's all untrue. I have every intention of carrying on. And then, of course, as soon as he says that, a couple of hours later, well, we have these extraordinary announcements, the statement appearing on X, as I said, on with his signature, which doesn't look like his signature, on blank paper, um, with a follow-up statement a few hours, 27 minutes later. It looks as if somebody went round to the White House and basically banged the table and forced these messages out, and that he clearly didn't want it to happen. But it's been very controlled. It's been carefully executed. There are all these signs of dissension and anger and argument and factional infighting. If we were talking about any other country, if we were talking about, say, Russia, we would be full of this. People would be speculating all over the place and all the time. But of course, because this is the United States, we don't want to talk about, at least the media, the mainstream media, the political class don't want us debating things in that kind of way.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. It's so many strange signs, yet there's no explanation, right? So, um, and when you're talking about the 1968, I also find that it's very hard to not to draw parallel there, right? At that in 1968, it was also an incumbent president who dropped out of the race, and it was also a war lingering there. It was the Vietnam War back then. Now it's the Ukraine War. And also there was an assassination, right? The RFK was assassinated in 1968. Here we have Donald Trump assassinated. He survived the assassination. And even the Democratic Party convention is going to be held in Chicago. 1968 was also in Chicago. There's a lot of parallel there. Now, if we draw that parallel, in the end, what happened in 1968 was Humphrey got he was the pro-war. That at that time was the war who was dividing issue, right? And then in the end, he's the pro-war candidate, and he also the vice president got the nominee, but he lost to Richard Nixon big time, right? Wasn't it? So is that an indication what's going to happen with Kamala Harris?
It's very likely. And I think, by the way, that you're completely correct. The single event that has caused this whole crisis is the fact that the United States is losing its proxy war in Ukraine. If the United States had achieved its objectives in Ukraine, the Russian army had been defeated, if the Russian economy had crashed, if President Putin had been forced to step down, we would be in a completely different position today. I mean, if Biden were indeed ousted from the presidency, he'd be going in a blaze of glory. Everybody would be talking about him being, the great president. More likely than not, he would still be cruising towards re-election in November, despite all of his obvious physical and mental problems. The fact is, the single reality, the biggest factor of all, is the fact that the United States is losing this war, just as it was in Vietnam. And I suspect that one of the reasons why Biden is being pushed out in the way that he is because increasing numbers of people in the United States, including his predecessor, Barack Obama, understand that the war has to be ended in some way and ended soon, and that the old man, Joe Biden, was standing in the way of that. And I think this is really how it's playing out. Now, what Kamala Harris proposes to do about this situation, I have absolutely no idea. I think if she goes into the election as the war candidate, the person who wants to keep the war in Ukraine going, then undoubtedly we will be looking at President Trump in November. It could be that she will try to put a distance between herself and Joe Biden about the war, but we'll just have to see.
Well, one thing Kamala Harris has done a little bit surprising to me is that Netanyahu is coming for a visit. He's going to give an address to the joint session in the Congress. Now, supposedly, Kamala Harris is not going to be there, or she's not going to preside over that. So I think the thinking is she doesn't want to be seen as plotting behind Netanyahu or something. So is that a little bit of shift of, at least in the Gaza, because Gaza, they do know is very unpopular, particularly among the young voters. That is the section that the young voters, they do need those young voters. Is that what their calculation is here?
Absolutely, that's exactly what it's all about. She wants to put as much distance as she can between Biden and herself over the situation in the Middle East. She knows perfectly well that she can't win the election without the support of young people. And that's indisputable if you look at the breakdown. So she cannot afford pictures to be circulating of her Netanyahu addressing Congress and Kamala Harris applauding him. I mean, that would be a disaster politically for her. So she has clearly been advised to stay away. But that is one war. That is the war in the Middle East. There is the other war in Ukraine, which America is now clearly losing. Every day, if you follow the news closely, you get reports of Russian advances now, of more places being captured, of more Ukrainian soldiers being defeated. There's reports this morning that 2 Ukrainian units, 2 battalions are about to surrender. I mean, there is this problem of the other war, and that has to be sorted out as well. Now, how she's going to do that, I have no idea. How she's going to deal with the situation in the Middle East, I have no idea. And bear in mind, anomalously, she is not president herself. The president continues to be Biden. And of course, he presumably will want to continue with the policies that he has committed himself to, which is support for the wars in Gaza and the Middle East and the war in Ukraine. So she could very well end up finding herself held responsible for wars that she probably wants to distance herself from.
What do you think from Trump's perspective? Do you think Trump prefer Biden to be the opponent or Harris?
This
I
is a
think
very good.
because I think for Trump, Biden is the known thing, right? They had the long fight for many years. But Harris is the question mark, isn't it?
Yeah, she is a question mark. I'm going to say something. I think that an active, engaged Biden would have been a more difficult candidate in some ways for Trump because
Okay.
Biden has more support within the Democratic Party, wider support within the Democratic Party. He has a longer political history. One gets the sense that more people like him than like Kamala Harris or would have done. Um, and he looks a rather more substantial, or would have looked a rather more substantial and convincing alternative to Trump. So if we taken the factor of old age and health out of it, Biden arguably might have been the more difficult opponent. But of course, given that we have the problem of old age, infirmity, poor health, and all of the rest, I could see that Kamala Harris might pose a different set of problems for Trump than Biden did. In particular, Kamala Harris is able to appeal to women voters. She's going to almost certainly make a big issue of the abortion Roe and Wade issue, which is going to play very strongly to her advantage amongst women voters. And she's probably going to be able, more successfully than Biden, to shore up support amongst black voters than Biden would have done. So I can see that there are problems. But to be frank, at this moment in time, neither Biden nor Kamala Harris look like fully convincing challengers to take on Trump.
I agree. I also think that actually Democrat should have done things differently. Even though I think for Biden to pull out is the correct thing to do, I think the way they did it, that they almost like a coup, and it's the donor, it's so clearly it's the donor who decided he has to be out. I don't like that. I don't like the fact that donors are the decisive factor in all this. And
I
also,
completely go on.
right, and I mean the difference is this time so clear that it is the donors who in the end was the decisive factor. And also I think the Democrats in Chinese word crisis have two words, right, two characters. One is danger, the other is opportunity. Whenever there's a danger, there's always opportunity. I actually think the Democrat could handle differently to present them with an opportunity, because now, okay, Biden now pull out. Instead of immediately they push for Kamala Harris, why don't all the party elders, right, the party bigwig, stay out of it? Let it have a real open primary in the convention. Encourage all the younger generations, whether it's Gavin Newsom or it's including Kamala Harris, or I mean Whitman, Gretchen Whitman, and all these people. Okay, Pete Buttigieg, whoever they are, just encourage them all run in an open primary, transparently, etc., and have a debate, etc. Because when they do that, when people can see there is a real competition in the primary, that it's a fair, it's transparent, I actually think it can energize people. For one thing, the spotlights will all be on the Democratic Party for the next foreseeable, about almost a month, right, until the next the convention. The spotlight will be there, the buzz will be there, and then the excitement, the energy will be in there. And by the time they finish the process, whoever emerges will be a better candidate against Donald Trump. Why can't they do something like that? Instead of, okay, this backdoor deals, oh, the donors said this, and then the factions are fighting, we are the one who in control. No, you're the one. I mean, why don't they just leave it to the voters and have a real competition within the party?
Because in that case, you would have a democracy within the Democratic Party. And the Democratic Party is not about democracy. The enormous risk, if you go down that particular road, the unacceptable risk, is that you will get a candidate at the end of it who is actually radical, generally left wing, and might actually want to change things in America in ways that would not please the donors, and who might actually want to carry out real change in the direction of American foreign policy. Ultimately, this is not even what we're seeing is not even about the election in November. It's more about control of the Democratic Party.
Yeah.
So this is really what this is all about. And I think we need to understand that and understand that very well.
Yeah, in the end, it's always about control, right?
It's always about control.
Yeah, yeah. We will get to that, to the JD Vance question. So Kamala Harris, let's talk a little bit more about her. For me, she is a horrible candidate in so many ways. For one thing, she's very weak, even within the party. Like you said, she doesn't have the solid support, not even compared to Biden, within the party. But if you look at her record, I think if now she become the real candidate, people will look closely to her record in the past. Like the main thing she was the prosecutor in California. Well, among other things, one thing she did was she hide evidence for this guy, Kevin Cooper, I think, is a inmate, death row inmate. She hide evidence that could possibly prove his innocence. Now, for me, somebody like that is, for me, is a big no-no. That means she doesn't care about human lives at all. When you in the justice system, you don't care whether this person actually is a death row inmate, possibly could be innocent. Then what do you care, right? So just somebody like that, how can the Democratic Party, whoever pushed her, believe that this could be a good candidate, right?
Well, I think you're absolutely right. I think she's a terrible candidate, actually, and I've heard exactly the same things about her that you have done. And of course, I've spoken to people who actually came up against her in the legal arena,
Okay.
and they were deeply unimpressed by her as Attorney General in California. So, and one or two have even brought up that particular case that you said, but they said that overall, their impression of her as an attorney general was that she was not particularly intelligent or effective or efficient or competent or even interested in what she was doing. Um, she is, I think, a very typical figure within the American political class of today. She has risen effortlessly upwards, despite the fact that she has very little to show for what she's done. I mean, there's no great record of success. You can't come along and say, well, she was Kamala Harris. She managed to sort out this problem, the ecological problem here, or that she was tremendously successful as a building up, businesses in this place, or that she dealt successfully with the crime issues in San Francisco. You can't point to a successful record as such, but she has been unswervingly loyal to the people who control the Democratic Party. She is essentially an official, a loyal official of the party and of the party machine, and she is reliable and she can be trusted in that way. So as a result, she has risen effortlessly. She didn't win a single primary vote in the 2020 contest. She was taken to pieces by Tulsi Gabbard in a debate which I watched. She's been a dismal vice president, but she is somebody that the people who control the Democratic Party trust to keep the party under their control. And that's why they picked her.
Mhm.
That's why she was picked as vice president and why she's now going to be the nominee.
Yeah. Yeah, talking about that, JD Vance.
Yeah.
Okay, I mean, when I first saw he was nominated, I thought it was good news because it could be worse, right? Nikki
Yeah.
Haley or Marco Rubio, I actually like him better. But the more I read about him, actually, the more concerned I am. Now, if it's up to me, I would like Donald Trump to pick Thomas Massey. But of
Yeah.
course, Thomas Massey would never pass the APEC. Okay, we know
Yeah.
that. They run a big campaign against him. So anyway, so JD Vance, I actually first heard about him. Actually, my husband read his book and then
Mm.
shared his, so I got a little, that's how I heard about him. In the way, I thought he makes sense because from his book, his upbringing is kind of interesting. He
Mm.
came from, I guess, a lot of the white working poor family, right? That kind of background, and then his mother has drug problems, etc. And in his book, he talk about the Appalachia. Appalachia is a very interesting area. It's an area that very rich in natural resource with a lot of minings going on, etc. But the people along there, many of them are really poor. It is a
Mm.
really poor area. Again,
Mm.
white working class, working poor. So he actually, and those are the people who Trump talk a lot about, are the forgotten people. I mean, people in Washington don't talk about Appalachia poor working white. In fact, I have a friend who is a researcher in soil and water. She told me one time that she was applying for some grant, I believe from National Science Foundation, could be Department of Agriculture. But he was a researcher applying fund from one of those
Mm.
government agencies. And in her big project, part of that is doing some testing, doing something for the Appalachia area, water and soil, because of the mining, because all that, those are contaminated, polluted areas that she thought she would do some testing. Well, when they were discussing her proposal, she said one of the people there said, "Oh, Appalachia, those are not America." They literally said that. They literally said something like that. just just to give you an idea, it is a forgotten area. Okay, they truly are literally forgotten. But anyway, for that reason, I thought JD Vance is interesting. But the past few days, I did some reading. I noticed how significant his rise related to this guy, Peter Thiel, who is a tech billionaire. One thing he did, among other things, there's all kinds of things he did for JD Vance. He pretty much make JD Vance where he is today. The one thing he did was JD Vance 2022 Senate campaign. Peter Thiel donated $15 million. What my question is this: with that, what are the odds? So if Peter Thiel saying, "Okay, I wanted the war to continue in Ukraine," because he is a Pentagon contractor, among other things, Peter Thiel has. So what if he said, "I want the war in Ukraine to continue"? What are the odds that JD Vance would say no? No, I don't
Well,
want
I
to.
don't know. I mean, but I think you make an absolutely valid point, because the clear picture that's emerging about the United States is that it's no longer a democracy; it's an oligarchy, and that it's people are able to buy and make candidates with money, and that it's money that makes decisions. So it's money that basically brought Biden down, and it's money that's raised JD Vance up, money that's brought up Donald Trump himself. The fact that he's such a rich man is the single reason why he is an important political figure in the United States. I mean, Trump would not be a political figure in the United States if it was not for the fact that he inherited this big fortune from his father and a business that went along with it. But you're absolutely correct. I mean, it is an oligarchy of wealth. The United States has become that almost entirely. And many people have been talking about JD Vance's connection to Peter Thiel and the influence that Peter Thiel almost certainly has over him. And of course, we can't know what views JD Vance has, which are his own, and what views are views which have been given to him, if you like, by Peter Thiel. Um, I don't think that. I think people are making altogether too much, by the way, about JD Vance's life story. I mean, he obviously has promoted that in that book that he wrote, but the reality is he has been a member of the American elite for quite a long time now. He went to Yale Law School. He's been supported by Peter Thiel. He's been a member of the US Senate. Um, he may have started poor, but for a fair amount of time now, he has been assimilated fully within the American political caste.
Yeah, yeah. And then again, just like I think the rise of JD Vance, the rise of Kamala Harris, and the fall of Joe Biden, it's all pretty much donor, big money
Absolutely. Yeah.
decided, right? It's all, yeah. It
It's
pretty much
completely,
controlled it.
completely so. As you correctly said, without Peter Thiel, JD Vance would not have got into the Senate. If he hadn't got into the Senate, he
Uh-huh.
wouldn't now be the big vice president. You can see again the way in which he's been lifted upwards. He hasn't risen in the way that people used to rise in politics in the United States, the way that, say, Abraham Lincoln did.
Mhm.
Become active in local politics, establish a name for himself
Yeah.
there, win
Mhm.
support in the local House of Representatives, develop a party organization, build friendships, win elections, get elected to local positions, and then use that to propel himself up into national politics. That was how American politics used to be conducted once upon a time. It isn't like that anymore. What happens is you have people who are fished up either by party machines or by donors, who go shooting upwards and find themselves in enormous positions of power without much of a record behind them. We spoke about how Kamala Harris has no real backstory. She's been a lawyer. She's for somebody who's almost 60, by the way, she has a remarkably thin backstory, if I have to say. But I mean, she's risen upwards without any significant achievement behind her. You could say exactly the same about JD Vance. I mean, he's got nothing of substance because he's a much younger man, but he's got absolutely nothing of substance to show, which would lead us to think that he is the sort of person who, in 4 years' time, if Trump is elected, would make a convincing candidate for president of the United States.
And Kamala Harris in particular, she actually was given the task about the border issue, right? She did absolutely nothing there. She wasn't even there. She didn't even visit, which is amazing to me. Why didn't she just do some optics, right? Pretending she cares and go there, talk to some border people, employees there, right? Just to show that she cares. She wasn't, she's actually interested. No, that's the thing that fascinates me.
Yes. No, you're completely correct. Can I? Sorry, maybe I shouldn't do this all the time, but since we're talking, the contrast again with China is very, very interesting. In that, in order to succeed in China, if you are, say, the party secretary or in some particular region, you have to show that you have succeeded in that region.
Yeah.
You have to show that you've done well in Guangdong or Shanghai or Sichuan or wherever, and there has to be a backstory behind you. It doesn't seem to work like that in the United States. Not only do you get political figures who rise who have nothing to show, but they don't want responsibility. They don't want to be given complex and difficult tasks because, one, that doesn't interest them, and two, they don't like doing that sort of thing. They don't like sitting at a desk and working for 15 hours a day and having meetings and talking to all the various other officials and coming up with a policy and implementing the policy and getting all the data in and doing all that sort of hard managerial, administrative work without which a political leader who really wants to make difference, has to do. No, what they want instead is to write a book which everybody reads, come up with nice thoughts, go on television, develop their sound bites, do that kind of thing. That is what they prefer to do in the America of today. And that's why nothing in America works anymore. Nothing that the Americans try to do has any administrative competences behind it. If you want to understand why the United States has fallen from that enormous manufacturing preeminence to the situation it is today, and compare it with, say, China today, that explains it.
Yeah, you're absolutely correct. I think in China, the party works is that you started in a very local village or a small town or a small city, and you need to have something to show for, right? Before you get promoted, before anybody notices you. And then you rise up and step by step, etc. That's how Xi Jinping came from. He started with some village, and to this day, he cares deeply about the countryside, the farmers, how the poverties in those areas, and because he started there, right? He knows, he experienced it, and then you can't just out of the blue write some books and then make some shows, some events, and then that's it. And then the big donor came in, and that's it.
Exactly.
Yeah. Okay, so the potential Trump presidency. What do you think? Now, first of all, is there panic in Europe now?
There is huge panic in Europe. I mean, they're absolutely horrified about what's happening. They don't know what to do. They did not expect this crisis with Biden. they'd overcommitted themselves to working with Biden, and they were hoping and expecting that the court cases and all of that would knock Trump out of the scene. But now they find that there's at least a possibility that he will come back. They didn't like Trump when they worked with him. They are even more worried about some of the things that he is saying now. And the German government, which is the most important government, has actually set up a crisis committee to try to think about what to do in case Trump is elected, which is astonishing.
Okay. And but here's the thing. Now, Trump said many times he can finish the war in 24 hours. But I think that Russia actually said something. It's not that simple. Actually, it's Russia. Yeah, that you can. Plus, I also saw that there is a possibility that Trump will put Eric Prince to be the Secretary of Defense and Jamie Dimon to be the treasurer. Okay. So yes, Victor Orban that does have a conversation with him, so it sounds like they are seriously trying to get this thing in the conclusion. Now, but how much of it, how realistic it is that Trump can finish everything very quickly? What are the odds there?
He can't finish it very quickly. I mean, this is the trouble with these wars that America starts, which is that, they usually begin with a bang. Everybody's enormously confident, wildly overconfident. There's a few brief ephemeral victories at the beginning, then everything starts to go wrong. They gradually come round to the understanding that they have to get out of it, but they can't really find a way to do it. And you saw that with Vietnam, you saw that with Iraq, you see this with Afghanistan, you saw that with Ukraine. You're seeing this with Ukraine now. They don't really have a plan. Trump doesn't have a plan to get out of Ukraine. He doesn't want to see an American geopolitical defeat in Ukraine, obviously. But he doesn't really know how he can come to an agreement with the Russians, which he can sell in the United States, which people in the United States will not see as a geopolitical defeat for the United States. So he doesn't really have a plan. I don't think any American political leader has a plan. And trying to do the kind of things that they would need to do, negotiate with the Russians in good faith, look at the general security situation in Europe, reconsider the realities of NATO, do all that kind of thing. I think for the Americans, that still remains politically impossible. And the Russians have made it fairly clear that without that kind of movement, they're not going to agree to peace in Ukraine. Because for them, it wouldn't actually be a peace. It would be another ceasefire before the next war.
Yeah, it doesn't really solve the problem. Ultimately,
No.
The root of the problem, there is no clear way to resolve that, right? That's where the problem is. I think the Ukrainian foreign minister is visiting Beijing now. Again, Alex Christoforo in his show, he said if I were Zelensky today, I would contact Beijing. And then he said, well, the Ukrainians are not going to listen to me. Maybe they did. I don't know, because the foreign minister is visiting Beijing. What do you think his purpose of his visit to Beijing?
It's a very, very good question. But I think that the Zelensky government understands that Donald Trump is more likely than not going to be the next president of the United States. But they are also dealing with a disastrous military situation. Again, I don't think people in the West understand how bad the military situation in Ukraine has become. We've seen a steady deterioration in Ukraine's position ever since the failure of its offensive, Ukraine's offensive last summer. Then there was the fall of Avdiivka in February. And then since the fall of Avdiivka, things have gone from bad to worse, but faster and faster and faster. So I think that the Ukrainians probably now understand that there is not going to be deliverance from the Europeans and from the United States. They have to try and come up with some kind of political way out. And the only government that can help them is the Chinese government. So that's why they've sent their people to Beijing. But, that's not going to be easy now because um, the Chinese probably would want to help Ukraine to, save itself. But they're probably going to suggest ideas to the Ukrainians, which even now the Ukrainians might find very, very difficult to accept. But still, it's a positive sign that Zelensky has sent his foreign minister to Beijing. And it's a positive sign that he's now talking about negotiations. Even the Russians have said as much.
Yeah. It's not that long ago, Li Hui was there, right? I mean, China has been trying, I
Yeah.
find, and there's so many opportunities they could have taken advantage of, but they always insisting on something that make it impossible to move forward, right? Isn't it?
Yeah.
They miss so many opportunities, the Ukrainians. And even now
Well,
you're saying is that they still have this attitude, right? It's very hard to change.
Well, they were very rude about Li Hui, as I remember a few weeks ago.
Yeah.
They were very rude about Xi Jinping and about China, and about the fact that China refused to attend
Uh-huh.
peace conference in Switzerland.
Yeah.
And I think we talked about it then, and we agreed that that was an extraordinarily foolish thing for Ukraine to do. Fortunately for the Ukrainians, I don't think the Chinese government is a government that particularly worries itself
Hmm.
about that sort of thing. I don't get the sense that Xi Jinping is a man who bears grudges. Um, but the fundamental problem is this: are the Ukrainians really going to Beijing in the mood to start genuine, sincere negotiations with the Russians? Or are they going to Beijing because they want to pull off some kind of trick? They think that they can sweet talk the Chinese into thinking that they're prepared to negotiate with the Russians, get the Chinese to put pressure on the Russians to stop, and then when the Russians stop, simply go back to doing all that they were doing before the war began. Because if it's that, then, I mean, this isn't going to work. The Chinese are not going to be deceived in that way. And of course, the Russians aren't.
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah, we'll see. I mean, he should be there or well on his way to yeah.
Mm.
Okay, so between the US and China relations. So in China, people are trying to figure out who Kamala Harris is and JD Vance because these are the new characters, right? I mean, Kamala Harris is not new, but she is serious now.
Mm.
Um, but Trump, I think by and large, if for China to pick one between Biden and the Trump, I think both the public and the government prefer Trump because he's more straightforward. Okay,
Yeah.
but they have no illusion that it's going to be easy dealing with Trump. One thing is trade because Trump already said he's going to cross the board going to charge 60% of tariffs and everything. Um, I think so far there is a thing called for things merchants under the value of 800 that you're exempt from all tariffs or something. He want to take that away even.
Mm.
So it's going to be so they are embracing for something like that.
Mm.
And not only that, the Republican Party platform has made it very harsh against China. JD Vance himself kind of hawkish on China. And also there's the Project 2025, which Trump dissolved, but nonetheless, it's from the Heritage Foundation, so it's very influential. So in there, they're both the platform and the Project 25, they talk all about how to go against China. So Trump himself talking about maybe ban the investment from China to the U.S., investment from the U.S. to China, all these sort of things. Do you think it's going to be an all-out economic war in the Trump presidency?
I think that it won't be because ultimately Donald Trump does not want to see the American economy completely crash. He's going to have some intelligent people around him. They're going to tell him very straightforwardly the United States is in no condition to wage an all-out economic war against China. And even these tariffs that he's talking about, yes, I think he does want to see a drift towards tariffs. He's got this idea that if America goes back to the economic policies of the 1890s, he gave a most interesting, really bizarre interview in some ways to Bloomberg in which he was actually talking about the policies, the economic policies of William McKinley, who was the president of the United States in the 1890s, as the policies to follow, which is, create high tariff barriers, protection, and that will somehow mean that you get this huge amount of income from the tariffs, and at the same time, your domestic industries will be able to grow and develop and evolve behind this tariff wall. Well, I think he's got a completely out of date and obsolete view of economics. And I think there will be people who will try to point this out to him. And I think in practice, when if Donald Trump does become president, he will probably want to start moving towards a more protectionist policies for the United States. But I think he's going to do it in a much more gradualist way than the way he is suggesting at the moment. The Bloomberg interview was extremely interesting because to the extent that Trump is able to, and I mean, temperamentally able to, he went out of his way to be conciliatory about China, a fact which I don't know whether people in China are aware of. He basically said Taiwan is none of our business. Taiwan is close to China. We can't go to war to defend Taiwan. That makes absolutely no sense for us. They can sort out their own problems. It's not for us to get involved. He said, I had a good relationship with Xi Jinping right up to the time of the pandemic. He seemed to suggest that he could get back into a good relationship with Xi Jinping. Again, he clearly wasn't interested in any of the tiresome human rights issues that Tony Blinken and co constantly trot out. And he even said somewhere that, look, I've got this issue with China on economics. I think they took advantage of us, over the last 30 years. You can take issue with that. But he went out of his way to say that I have no actual feelings of hostility to China itself. So he was trying, in his own confused, incoherent, rambling way, because that's Donald Trump, to be conciliatory to China. And I think deep down, he understands that he can't allow this relationship with China to spiral out of control. The problem is, will Trump actually be any more in control of the United States government if he's elected than he was in his first term, or than Joe Biden is now? Because I'm far from convinced that he will be. And there are other people in the US who are far more aggressively hardline against China than Donald Trump himself led us to think he was from this interview with Bloomberg.
Yeah, he also said that Taiwan needs to pay, for the US to protect, and which caused a minor panic in Taiwan, I think. and then he also, I think, actually in his the convention speech, he actually said that Xi Jinping sent him a nice note after his assassination. Yeah, I mean, like you said, he's incoherent, so from time to time he will spill out something that is a little bit surprising. But he does that constantly. It seems like
he does this all the time. I mean, he also, however, referred to the to COVID, the coronavirus, as the China virus again. I mean, he said. I mean, he says one thing, he says something completely different. You can't expect him to take a consistent line. But as I said, at some level, he does seem to understand that an absolute rupture with China makes no sense. And I think that, when he's at his best, which isn't always and isn't often, he does understand that he needs to negotiate his problems with China rather than to confront them, which is certainly better than what we've seen with Biden. But, if I was the Chinese government, which of course I'm not, and I'm telling them that, which they of course already know, I wouldn't trust Trump to follow through on any of these nice things.
Yeah, he kidnapped Meng Wanzhou, which the Huawei CFO, which is a big thing for a lot of people. Yeah. So yeah, but even though it seems to me like John Bolton is the one who was behind the whole thing, and almost like last minute told Trump. Now for Trump, I guess, even though he might not agree with this, he probably just didn't want to pick up the fight with John Bolton on this matter, right? And yeah, so that's where you're saying is he really in control, right? Is he that's or even Biden's in control? We'll see when Biden appears. Biden might not even appear. We'll see. Totally taken over by somebody, Blinken or someone, Sullivan. Yeah. And also the other thing I noticed is that this trade war thing, sometimes I find what's interesting is the United States is almost like in a non-losing position. So chip war, for example, there's so much talking that the US put a lot of pressure on the ASML and the Japanese chip equipment makers. Okay. And both companies are hurt by that because of their spots, minimize their dealing with China. In the meantime, what I find interesting is that there's two chip companies in the US. One is called Applied Materials. The other one is called the KLA Corporation. Now, their percentage of their revenue from China actually increased. So Applied Materials, I think 43% of this year, up until April, their income coming from China. KLA, their increase, the China sale increase for their total sale at 20% increase for this year. So it seems to me the trade war for the US is either they hurt China or they hurt countries like Japan and the Dutch. The US is somehow benefit from it. Okay, if China can stand it, somebody will benefit from it. Well, that will be the US company. So sometimes I wonder the war is really against China or it just the US take advantage as much as they can, sometimes at the cost of their alliances.
I think you're completely correct about this. I mean, I think we must be careful not to attribute too much coherence to American economic and trade and foreign policies. I mean, I think that a lot of this happens more by chance than by intention. But the fact is that when America does launch economic wars, it's always very careful to try to insulate itself from the backwash. And it is its allies who pay the price. The Europeans have discovered that with Russia, the economic war against Russia. And of course, if the United States tries to wage an economic war against China, which it would be crazy to do, I think it would certainly be a lot more affected than it has been by the economic war against Russia because it's so important. The relationship with China is so important. But other countries who are American allies would pay a much bigger price overall, even than that.
Yeah, it's multiple, like you said, yeah, the Europeans. But why are these countries just keep on doing these things? They must know this, right? The Europeans and Japan and Korea, I mean, all these countries, they must know that they are paying a price and they should. I mean, I see the US companies are benefiting from it. Intel is another one example. They don't see that. They just don't protest whatever the US have done to them. They will just full-heartedly accept that at their own cost.
It is astonishing. It's one of the most extraordinary facts about the events of the last 15 years. I've obviously seen this play out in Europe. It seems incredible that Japan and Korea and indeed Taiwan. I mean, bear in mind, let's assume that this whole thing plays out with the chips in exactly the way that people say. And so the United States comes along. It insists on developing its own chip industry. Taiwan pays a grim price because Taiwan has positioned itself as the producer of high-end chips because it can't sell them to the US. Because of the US, it can't sell them to China either. China is busy developing its own high-end chips, and it's shown that it can and can make them as well, and it'll produce more and more of them. Taiwan is screwed. I would say it simply. I mean, it really is. The US might be better off, debatable whether it would be actually, but Taiwan undoubtedly is screwed. And yet they go along and do this. They put themselves in the line of fire. They risk a complete rupture with China, with the mainland, I should say, not with China. They are part of China, but with the mainland, which is hardly in their interests. Japan, until a few years ago, as I remember, was heavily investing in China, doing very, very well there. I have a rice cooker in my house, which is by a Japanese company. But if you look underneath, it's actually made in China. So they were doing really well. And of course, all that relationship has been disrupted. Does anybody in Japan really believe that there is a threat to Japan from China? I cannot believe it. South Korea as well. I mean, their relations with North Korea are going from bad to worse. They were looking to develop a close relationship with Russia. That's all collapsed. They need to be on good terms with China. That's become more difficult. But they all follow loyally the United States, which instructs them to do things that are completely counterproductive to their countries and their societies. And the only explanation one can come up with is that we're looking at a colonial system, and we're looking at governments and political classes in all of these countries that have have now developed a colonialist mindset and see their future and their own prospects, their own personal prospects, linked more to that of the imperial metropolis, which is the United States, than to the countries that they administer on the metropolis's behalf. So this is the only way to explain this. There is really no other.
Yeah. I mean, it's incredible, right? It's so obvious to to people like us, but they seems like it's so incapable of being an independent country. I guess is still very hard, even for European powers and for Japan and Korea. It just fully independent seems very hard, and it's always very ironic to me. Like Taiwan insisting on, oh, we want to be independent, independent. In reality, what they're doing is anything but to be independent, because if they are truly independent, they should always think what's the best interest for Taiwan, for the people in Taiwan. But they can't even make decisions. For example, not that long ago, there's an egg crisis. For whatever reason, there's a shortage of eggs. China, the mainland is right there. There are plenty of eggs there. They refuse to buy it from the mainland. They buy it from Brazil, so far away. I mean, why? They just want to make a point that, oh, we are independent from China. Yeah. So as a result of that, you pay very high price for something like eggs, and they're not very fresh. By the time they got to Taiwan, it's not very fresh. I mean, it's just ridiculous. But they have that somehow. That is for them is being independent. Was
Well, if the Taiwanese authorities, the authorities in Taipei, really had the interests of their people at heart, and if they really sought a true sovereignty and independence, they would seek that sovereignty and independence as part of the sovereignty and independence of China, which is a great power of which they could then be a part. There's a famous story, I'm sure as a Chinese person, yeah, you know it. It happened at the start of the Song dynasty, that there was a region that, the ruler of that region said, I want to ask the emperor, I want to stay outside China. And the emperor responded, what crime have your people committed so they don't want to be a part of China? And I think this is the same question that you ought to be asking about the people of Taiwan. I mean, China is this huge country. It's rising country. It's becoming an increasingly prosperous country. It makes absolute complete sense for Taiwan economically to be as integrated with China as possible. If the authorities in Taiwan really want the best interests of their people, and they want to have a situation where they have a say in the decisions that the Chinese nation, the Chinese government makes, so they ought to want to be part of it so that they can have their say, a proper say in Beijing. To me, that is obvious. That is absolutely logical sense. But of course, they don't accept that. And the result is that they have subordinated the interests of the people of Taiwan to a completely different country, which is the United States, which has no deep sense of obligation to them. Because whereas China sees Taiwan as part of itself, the United States sees Taiwan as essentially a piece on the chessboard, as was it Douglas MacArthur said, the unsinkable aircraft carrier through which the United States dominates the Pacific. Now that's, I think, a simple view.
Yeah.
I know a lot of people would push back strongly against it, people in Britain and the United States and all the rest. But it seems to me, if you want to take a really hard-headed, intelligent understanding of what the true interests of the people of Taiwan is, I think I've just set it out.
Yeah. And talking about being a sovereign, independent country, even United States, not always act on its best interest. So, for example, the latest Microsoft CrowdStrike outage, right? I landed right before that on
Yeah.
Thursday, and then right after that was happened. But when I was looking and tried to get my laptop back, because of the outage, it's very hard to get through the phone calls.
Mm.
For a couple of hours on Friday, there was just nobody answered. You immediately get a message saying because of that, they cannot take any phone calls. So it took me forever to even find somebody. So on Friday, it was total panic from my side. But of course, it doesn't help with this outage going on. Well, the countries who are not affected by it, China is not, Russia is not. I think there's one or two banks in Hong Kong was affected by it, but the mainland is not. Talking about de-risking, one thing the Chinese government has been doing is to gradually phase out all the Western systems, simply for these kind of reasons. But my question is, even for the United States, need to be alerted by something like that. This is one company, Microsoft, right? Of course, it's used contractor, the crowd strike. But this one company can cause so much trouble, so much danger, even though it's not intentional. But I think the United States need to protect itself for something like that as well. But the United States instead always saying, "Oh, the security risk is it's coming from China, from Russia." It doesn't look into these kind of risks, right? That
No, it doesn't.
can be really devastating. But so talking about being independent, I think the U.S. government does not always doing the things that independent away from big corporations either, right?
No, it doesn't, because again, as we discussed at the start of the program, the United States today is a financial oligarchy. It's run by a small group of people, Cowdstrike, the people who run Cowdstrike being amongst them. Cowdstrike, of course, played a very, very big role, as I very well remember, in the Russiagate allegations
Yeah.
that were launched against Donald Trump. So here we are. They're now back, and they're responsible for this huge crisis. But don't expect anything to happen to them. Just as Boeing isn't able to get its act sorted out, CrowdStrike isn't able to get its act sorted out either, because there is no accountability. There's no proper system of economic responsibility in the United States, because oligarchies don't really allow proper systems of accountability or competition. And the result is that these problems multiply and get worse. And if you have an oligarchy that is self-interested, the people obviously suffer.
But it can pose as a big problem. So at this
Oh,
time,
yeah.
it's everything is down. It's affected banks and 911, and literally some people's lives are at risk, right? And it
Oh,
seems like the
absolutely.
government was totally not doing anything, right? They just
No.
let the Microsoft and CrowdStrike let them sort things out. I didn't see the role of the government in this
The,
crisis.
the government has played no role at all. The government at the present time in the United States does not exist, to the extent that there is a political system at the center. It is more concerned in carrying out the coup against the current president than it is in actually conducting the affairs of the United States efficiently. And we've just seen it.
Yeah, and I think Donald Trump said that the danger is coming within. So
Yeah.
I do think Donald Trump kind of has a better understanding of the
Yes.
situation of the problem,
Yes.
right? Better
Yes.
than certainly than Joe Biden and then Hillary Clinton. But he can't really do much about it, right? That's where the problem is.
Well, he has an awareness that something is wrong, What he doesn't have is the intellectual framework to understand why it is wrong, or any real plan on how to address that. Donald Trump is one of these people who thinks there's lots of bad people, lots of bad actors there, Crooked Joe,
Mhm.
and Sleepy Joe, Crooked Hillary, all of this. If you could just get rid of them and put the right people in, and then carry up, impose tariffs and do all that sort of thing, well, everything will come right. And of course, it doesn't work like that, especially in a political system as complicated and as um, corrupt, to say it
Mhm.
bluntly, as that of the United States nowadays.
Um, before we go, just so you know, have you paid attention to The Simpsons? The Simpsons always predict things, right? And the Simpsons predicted the rise of the Donald Trump, the campaign, that etc. I mean, when he was down from that elevator, it's almost you can match us, The Simpsons, etc. But the Simpsons did one of the episodes talking about a women president in the United States, and one of the so-called women president was wearing a purple suite and a pearl necklace, almost exactly like one picture that taken for Kamala Harris.
Good grief.
So we will see if the Simpsons is correct this time. Let's hope not. Let's hope not.
Let's have not indeed. Well, quite, yeah.
But
Gosh.
yeah, but Nikki Haley actually at one point said, "Oh, it's going to be down between me and the Kamala, so we are going to get a women president, etc. But it's going to be her between her and her, Kamala Harris."
What a grim thought. Nikki versus Kamala. Anyway, we so far we have not found ourselves facing that. But seriously, I mean, it's not perhaps so surprising that the Simpsons is this predictive, organization, this predictive entity in the United States, because so much about the United States is, fact following fiction rather than the other way around, which is what you get in most places. I mean, so much about the United States is constructed now. It's not, real. It's just, imagery and marketing and all of that. That it's not surprising. As I said, that as I said, some art following fact. It's the other.
Yeah,
It's now become the other way around. Fiction following fact. It's fact which follows
all of the
is
fiction.
shaped around fiction.
And the Simpsons is very American. I think the other
Oh
thing is
yeah,
that those writers are very, they fully understand, deeply understanding about American societies, and
correct.
so
Correct.
that's.
I mean, the thing I would say about The Simpsons is, of course, it is there is a very strong element of satire, and
Uh-huh.
that is one of the things that America still has going for it. That there are a lot of Americans who can see through the absurdity of this weird situation in which they find themselves in, even though um, The Simpsons never really provides any answers, and
No.
those answers are not there to be found. I'm going to say, I mean, short of a revolution,
Mhm.
and it would take some kind of a revolution to change the system, short of a revolution, which doesn't need to be violent, by the way.
Mm.
It's very difficult to see how this particular system can change. Very difficult to see how it can be changed from within, certainly.
One more thing, I just remember RFK Jr. What do you think his role going to be moving forward? Doesn't seem there's much happening in his campaign. Is he going to be part of the? There was some leaked conversation he had with Trump. Is he
Mm.
going to be part of the Trump administration?
I don't think so.
Hmm.
In the end, I don't think that either he or Donald Trump will want him in the administration. But the thing about RFK, his tragedy, if you like, is that, I mean, he's not a flawless candidate. He has some ideas of his own, which I find sometimes very, very eccentric. But he was a genuine figure within the Democratic Party with his own ideas, his own beliefs, his motivations, his support base, all of that. But this party, the Democratic Party, where they have this complete control over everything, they didn't have any place or space for him. And I think this is true of the political system as a whole. because RFK was not able to take over the Democratic Party in a way that to some extent Donald Trump has been able to take over the Republican Party. He has been isolated and marginalized, and I'm afraid that will probably continue. I don't really see him playing a big role politically in the United States for the foreseeable future. That might change, but for the moment, I think he's been pushed into the background.
There's also something about the Democratic Party voters versus the Republican Party voters. Now, part of the reason I think Trump is more successful with what you're saying, taking over the Republican Party, is his voters has been very loyal to him, right? The
Yes,
MAGA people
yes.
and etc. But the Democrats, it seems like even though they like Bernie Sanders, right? They were a big portion of the people who,
Mhm.
but they are not following Bernie Sanders the way or support him the way that the MAGA people, the Trump people supported him. And why is that?
Well, I think here it is a question of leadership because both Bernie Sanders and RFK didn't fully understand their own bases.
Uh,
I mean, RFK went and supported Israel in a way that many of the young people who were attracted to RFK just would not accept. Um, Bernie Sanders went along in the end with the Democratic Party establishment, which again compromised his appearance as a sort of political rebel. Whereas Donald Trump, whatever you may think about him, he's always managed to keep himself very closely aligned with his base. So his base see him as one of them. And it's that link between them and him which explains the intense loyalty that they feel towards him. Um, it's his great skill
mhm.
as a political leader. I mean, he doesn't have administrative or managerial skills or policy skills or any of those other things, but he does understand his own base.
And he doesn't cave to the big names, so like the
No,
Bushes, the Cheneys.
no, no,
He's not
no,
that like immediately intimidated by them,
no,
right?
no,
Whereas
exactly,
I mean, RFK Jr. has the big name, but he seems to still not playing that, right? He doesn't.
exactly.
He's not good at using his tools available to him.
That's
Um,
that is exactly right. I mean, Trump doesn't feel the need always to suck up to the big leaders of the Republican Party, the McConnell or the Bushes or anything of that kind. Whereas RFK in the past has done, and as you say, has a certain reticence about playing up on the fact that he's a Kennedy. He doesn't have the swagger and the confidence and the vanity. People call it narcissism that Trump does, but it does give Trump a quality of self-confidence that these other leaders don't have. And with Bernie Sanders, it's even worse because Bernie Sanders, in the end, shows signs at times of wanting to push back against the establishment in the Democratic Party, but ends up always being loyal to them. And as I said, that's ultimately cut away his support base.
yeah. Yeah, that's very unfortunate because I really think like Bernie Sanders, there's a lot of support for him within the party. If he just insists on what he believes in,
Yeah.
firmly believes in, he would have the same kind of support, like the MAGA people towards Trump. I think he would.
Absolutely,
Yeah,
absolutely. Well,
but
the other thing is that they're terrified. Bernie Sanders is terrified that if he really stands his ground, then he will be blamed if Donald Trump wins.
yeah,
It's an absurd thing. I mean, I think that's an absurd and a stupid way of conducting politics. But there it is, because Trump's going to win anyway, more likely than not. So I mean, uh, um, if it had been Bernie versus Trump, well, the dynamics might have been completely different.
yeah. I also think so too. I think a lot of people
Mm,
would go
mm,
to Bernie instead of a Trump.
yeah.
Yes, yeah. Do you expect any drama for the coming convention, the Democratic Party convention, or is it going to be Kamala Harris?
I think it is going to be Kamala Harris. There might be some drama on the fringes, especially over the Israel issue. But I think that the DNC is going to work overtime to to tie the whole thing down. And of course, what we're going to get is, the enthusiastic support for Kamala Harris, or all of these people. As I said, it really is going to look like a Soviet Congress of the 50s and 60s. Everybody comes round and enthusiastically supports the new appointed leader who nobody really takes very seriously behind, and they're all probably laughing at her behind the scenes. But I mean, that's what they're going to try and do. It'll be very unconvincing, and I don't think it's going to work, but I think that is what they're going to try to do.
She should pick as her running mate, though, that could help her to some degree,
Yeah.
right?
But again, the probability is that we're going to see exactly the same degree of control over picking the running mate as we've seen about Kamala Harris. So yes, she probably. I mean, you can already see that there's, they're working away. They're saying, he's got to be white, he's got to be a man, he's got to have a working class background, but he's also got to be completely loyal to the Democratic Party. So they're going to look for somebody like that, and the result is that we're going to have another machine politician who's just going to be joining the ticket, and that might win some support in some places, but I think it's also going to put off an awful lot of people.
Yeah, and like I said, when I was looking at the potential candidates, for the running mate, I think more or less what you're saying, that they check box the white male and also swing from a swing state, probably, most likely, yeah. And those are the criteria. And like you said, that are in the mainstream, the Democratic Party that can control. Yeah. Yeah. Okay. That's all I have. Let's talk Friday.
Friday.
And then let's talk a little bit more about what's going on in China. So when all these chaos going on in the US, what's going on in China?
Excellent. Speak to you then, Sophia.
Thank you so
Have a
much.
great week. Right. Bye.
Bye.